if you are doing PT and stretching just to keep your symptoms at bay, then you haven't looked deep enough. And I messaged her, like, what does that mean? And she's like, your dysregulated nervous system and inability to process your emotions are causing your continuous pain. I ended up working with her for the first 3 months. And I'm thinking she's a pelvic PT, so I'm going to go over all of my symptoms and all these little things. And she's like, nah, we don't need to talk about that. We need to talk about your nervous system. We need to talk about that you don't have physical damage. I was dealing with the fear of this pudendal neuralgia, basically a pinched nerve at your sit bones. And she's like, look at the bazillion number of cyclists in the world. Had you ever heard of this before? You've been into cycling for 25 years, training, racing, doing all. I'm like, no. She's like, because it's incredibly uncommon and your body is keeping you off your bike so that you can pay attention to it and pay attention to what's going on in your brain and slow you down.
So the big question is this. We know spontaneous remissions and so-called miracle cures exist. We also know they aren't so spontaneous after all. I'm living proof of this, having cured my quote-unquote incurable illness. There's something to how this happens. So how do we, as humans with chronic symptoms, tap into this so-called miraculous healing capacity? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answers. My name is Dr. Erin Hayford, and welcome to the Sacred Illness Podcast. Before we begin today's episode, just my standard medical disclaimer. This podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The content should not be considered a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always consult with a qualified healthcare professional regarding any medical concerns. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Sacred Illness Podcast. I'm very excited today to have another special guest here to share his story of healing and experiences with mind-body medicine. Today, we have Andrew, who's coming from outside of the Atlanta area. He is a civil and environmental engineer, and his story is one of working with chronic pain, specifically chronic pelvic pain. For those who are watching, you'll see there's a bicycle behind Andrew, and that's relevant to the story because he's a cyclist. And it's easy to attribute the symptoms to, like for Andrew's story, his pain is very common in people who are bicyclists. And so it's easy for us to blame it on those activities. But his story is really interesting because he was able to kind of step outside of that space and say, I think there's something more to it. So we're going to hear about his story and his journey with that pain, how the cycling was sort of part of the story and helping to lead to some of your discoveries that you made in your health and your well-being and that mind-body connection. He's raising 2 teenage boys and he has a wife who's a NICU nurse. And so thank you so much for being here, Andrew. We've been chatting on Instagram for a long time. So we were saying it's nice to meet like virtually in person finally. And yeah, I'll turn it over to you. I'd love to just hop right in wherever this story begins.
Yeah. Thanks, Erin. Good to talk to another Yankee transplant and bond over talking quickly, thinking quickly. That's what we can say, right?
Yes.
Thanks for having me on. I like to share my story. It's a way to give back to the folks that helped me. There's a ton of folks like yourself that put a lot of free material out there in hopes to reach people. I'm an engineer. I do that as my day job. I've done a few podcasts and I get people that contact me and I help them out. So I try to weave in what I'm up to and give people hope that they can get out of it and not just get back to their old ways, but get back to a better way and find some things out about themselves in the process, which I've learned a lot about myself. So I'll really condense the story short and kind of get it out there and then we can dig into it. So back in mid-2019, for about 3 years after that, I dealt with a handful of odd symptoms like stiff and popping joints, muscle pain and cramps, brain fog, weird, urgent and frequent urination. And these would come and go. And I went through the naturopathic route, tons of blood work and urine and tests and supplements and food eliminations. And that really didn't get me very far, but that's what I dealt with for a few years. In April 2022, so almost 3 years ago now, right? I got hit by incredible pelvic pain and symptoms around pelvic pain. Knocked me out. Quickly put me to the point where I couldn't work and went through the physical mode, typical physical modalities. And we can go into all the stuff you would expect, urologist, pelvic specialist, and then kind of the medicated side, pain medication, injections, PT, stretching. I'll keep going. Got to a really dark place during that period, but slowly recovered to a point where I could get back to life, but I was nowhere near 100%. I went through a few months of that. And then during an especially stressful time in my life, my father passing away and a few other big events around people that I love and care for, all the symptoms came back and then some.
Wow.
Some, the addition of sitting bone pain where I couldn't sit on hard surfaces.
Wow.
And I returned to the physical treatment at first, but I really was able to associate that to stress. I was very fortunate that I got breadcrumbs along the way, that like little pieces of information that helped me see that it was stress related and not just a physical issue that needed to be treated through 100% physical means. And so through that, I ran into mind-body approaches, TMS, and started working with an initial coach who got me out of the worst of it, and then plateaued for a while and worked with a second coach and got me to 100% recovered.
Wow.
And like I mentioned earlier, learned a lot about myself in the process. And that was a little over a year ago. And at that time, I decided to share my story. And so for the past year, I've had my story out there. The Instagram site that you referred to, the first podcast I did is about a year old. And I've just been helping people pretty much passively. My story's out there. People find me in different ways. I message with them, try to figure out where they're at, aim them at, books, resources, coaches for sure. And it's been really rewarding. And it's so different than what I do as an engineer and managing projects and people and technical stuff. And I get a lot out of it. So that's my quick story. That's back to 2019. So that's like 6 years in whatever that was, 5 minutes.
Yeah, love that. The overview. So let's sink our teeth into that, because there's so much in there that I think we can extract. And I was saying to you too, before I hit record, just how fascinating it is to me that, and I guess it makes sense that we follow the same trajectory, right? Of like getting to that place where it's like, this isn't working, this isn't working, this isn't working. And I don't know what that is, where some of, is it luck? Is it fate? I don't know. That some of us get turned on to mind body stuff, and some of us just continue down that path of having like a good enough life of like management, essentially, where we're just taking medications for the rest of our life or whatever that is. So what I think that's part of this work too, is like, right, trying to just get that information out there, because it's just not the normal way of thinking about it. And I want it to be. That's kind of the goal of the work that I do. And like you said, putting out free content, just trying to put stuff out into the world so that people can, like, increasing the chances that people are going to bump into this information, because it feels like it is very much just like luck of the draw. If someone like hears about it or hears someone's story or learns about these alternative things, versus it being a more commonly like shared thing, right? Like not many doctors are like, oh, well, why don't you try TMS or that or whatever.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to actually first clarify the TMS thing, because TMS to some folks means transmagnetic stimulation, which is like a treatment for depression and anxiety. Yeah. Will you share with us what that's all about?
Yeah, and I don't use that acronym very often, because I like the mind-body condition, mind-body syndrome. I like that term better, but TMS, it doesn't even matter what it stands for. It goes back to John Sarno's original work from the 80s, and a lot of people see him as the more medical route of mind-body science. So I've found in my interactions that there's that medical route that people got there. There's former back surgeons that use mind-body approaches instead of back surgery anymore. But then you also have more of that psychological side that comes from the angle. So TMS comes from Dr. John Sarno, who wrote a series of books starting in the 80s. People see him as one of the forefathers of this approach. But I don't use that acronym because I find it's confusing to people. And we've learned so much about it, not to discredit him, because he did really some cool stuff when he wrote those initial books and he was really ahead of his time. But, we can use different terms and not make it confusing.
Totally. Yes. Those books are really great. I think it's a good kind of, just like you said, it kind of bridges that gap of like, because he's a medical doctor, but he's right. He's a medical doctor, but he's coming into this world of like, basically kind of like what we're saying, like, I'm seeing all these people, nothing's working, what's missing, what's missing. And that led him to developing this methodology and mindset that he has around working with chronic pain. And so you worked with a coach trained in his methodology. Is that right?
The coaches I worked with had those approaches in the various different training methods that are out there now. Pain reprocessing therapy, PRT, is another one that's out there that many coaches go through and learn. And again, it all depends on how people get there. What is their background? Incredible physical therapists that now look at it and say, this is not just me putting my hands on you and fixing your muscles in alignment. This is a whole approach of convincing you that you're safe and that you are nowhere near as broken as you think. And so I learn a lot from those PTs. I learn people that come into it from like the therapist, LCSW side. I like to get all these pieces. And I think when people contact me, I can hear from them where their mindset is and kind of cater to that a bit. You know, I've listened to way too many podcasts and continue to do so because I just find it so fascinating. And that when they connect with me, I can aim them at something that resonates. Because you know how it is, like the first interaction they have may be their turn on or turn off.
Totally.
If they come from a more science background, like I have, if the first thing I aim them at is really woo-woo, right? Crystals, and they're going to be like, yeah, hell no, this is not me, right?
Right.
So, you know, it's just finding the connection to get them introduced to it.
Yes, absolutely. That's so the mindset piece, because part of your story was like you had that recognition of like the stress, like you were very, and maybe that's your engineer brain where you're like correlating, you know, like, okay, when this happens, who knows, right? Like we're able to see it from that way. I think so many of us get that message from doctors too. Like it's kind of in this more, maybe not condescending, but just like poo-pooing way of like, oh, it's probably just stress. And it's like, we say that in this flippant way. And it's like, okay, but that's actually a thing. Like that's actually a huge thing. Why don't we sink our teeth into that more? Like, why don't we pay attention to that more and really look at what that actually means? Because that is like a huge cause of illness and a foundational piece of illness. And I think, you know, so many of us can probably say like, oh yeah, I can, you know, when I get stressed, my symptoms flare. When this big event happened, like for you, right? Like everything came back, or that's when everything started. But somehow like there's like a switch that's not flipping, right? It's like we're not quite like making that connection of like, okay, so that's the focus, that's where I need to tune in, and instead we go down that physical route. So yes, it's totally like the mindset piece and finding that inroad where you can speak to people. And I often say like, this is why my work is so unsexy, because I'm like trying to get people into this world where we're just not in that paradigm. It's a different paradigm to think of illness in this more like less physically tangible way and more in this like brain connected way. It's physical, right? Like the nervous system wires to everything in the body. There's nothing not real or physical about it, but I think it's just because it's like you can't diagnose a nervous system that's stressed, right? There's just a different way we have to look at it. And so what would you say, because you said something so key, I think, and I wrote it down, like there's this whole thing with pain in convincing you that you're safe, right? And you're not as broken as you think, that kind of mindset. So how would you, if you were talking to someone who's very much in that, you know, so-called Western medical mindset, like this is physical, I need medication, I need surgery. How do you begin to talk to someone like that?
Yeah. As I've talked to people, I think that the first step is understanding some basics of pain science. And again, that might be my engineer brain, that cause and effect, but getting people to wrap their head around that the sensation they have, whether it's pain or something else, is not a direct correlation to what's going on at the point of the body where they feel it. Your body part sends a signal to the brain, and then the brain decides what to do with it. And if you watch your hand get a nail through it, your brain's going to immediately turn that into pain.
Yep.
These are some obvious things, but there's so many nuances along that spectrum of what the brain can do with the signal, or whether the brain can continue to create pain with no signal happening. And so I think that's a really important first step. And it can be an aha moment for somebody who has been to all these appointments to doctors, and the doctor, I can't find anything wrong. Your scans are showing up fine. You don't have an infection. You don't have this. And they're like, well, why do I have this pain? And I said, well, your brain is creating the pain. And there is something going on there physically. You need to kind of think about, is that happening because the brain is causing the pain and that's why the muscles are tight? Because, if you can't figure out anything else that started that domino, there is some reason that the brain is continuing to create pain.
Yep.
And so that's a really important first step, because that will help people buy in and gain a little bit of safety, a little bit of like, okay, I see how this is happening. And it may turn the alarm level down a little bit. And every time you can turn that alarm level down and get that nervous system closer to a state of calm and get out of that fight or flight, if you can, you're going to start to be able to think more rationally.
Yes.
And really hard to move into any of the tools that will help if you're still on high alert.
Yeah.
So I think that understanding pain science is so key. I have some personal stories that I think are good. There's the phantom limb story that you could use. There's the somewhat famous story about the guy getting the nail through his boot and being in excruciating pain and then taking the boot off and the nail went between his toes.
Oh, wow.
Right? There's so many. And I used this one recently with somebody who was younger than me and was I knew he had a girlfriend and, pelvic pain was getting in the way of his life and all this stuff. I said, all right, let me connect you to this. Let's say you're home watching a movie. And this is a really weird one, but it gives you an idea of sometimes like you just have to find the thing to connect.
Yeah.
You're sitting home watching a movie and you feel somebody starting to rub your shoulders. You expected your girlfriend to come over. She's rubbing your shoulders. It feels good. It's relaxing. You look up and it's your buddy playing a joke on you. How does the rubbing on your shoulders feel? He's like, oh, that's so creepy. I said, well, how did it go from feeling good to creepy instantaneously?
Yeah.
I said, do you see that the signal that was coming from your shoulders to your brain was exactly the same?
That's so good.
But your brain, when it thought it was your girlfriend, it was relaxing and like, oh, good, she's here. We're going to watch this movie. And it's your weird buddy playing a prank on you and getting a laugh. And immediately, like, you wanted to punch him. He was like, yeah, I would punch him. I'm like, okay, well.
That's great. I mean, I think that's exactly the kind of, like you're saying, you're finding that like metaphor, right? That helps a person relate it to their own life where they're like, okay, that makes sense. And now I can make that not so big leap now into how this could be the exact same thing. And I even think about what we refer to as a referred pain, for example, gallbladder pain is really common, or gallbladder issues. It's common to feel pain in different parts of the body. It's not this linear thing. And I think this is so key. And this actually can go across the spectrum of symptoms, no matter if it's a pain thing or some other sensation in the body, where it's normal and biologically adaptive and smart to be kind of afraid of it, right? To have this response of like, oh crap, what's happening in my body? Because if nothing else, that's the point of it, right? Is to be like, tune in, something's happening. But then like where we go from there is what matters, right? So it's supposed to get your attention. It's supposed to be a little bit of a like, oh, what is that? But if we get stuck in that like fear cycle of like, oh my God, like you said, like I'm broken, my body's failing, I'm never going to be safe. I'm never going to be okay. We can start to like, I see this so many times with the people I work with where our bodies themselves become a trigger, like there's something in our world that makes us feel not safe. There's something that is the initial wound, so to speak. And that's what kind of starts things off. But then the body itself can perpetuate that. And so it really is important to have those experiences where we start to see, oh, okay, I can see how this is causing that or feeding into it. I just had a session last week with someone, a one-on-one session, and she has lots of symptoms and lots of sensations, but we were focusing on this sensation she was having in her liver, and she was convinced, I think I have cirrhosis or there's something wrong with my liver, or like this is another disease or issue because she has so much trauma just from being sick. And we did some somatic work, like tuned into that sensation, and it moved. And I was like, well, what does that mean then? Right? Like if it was in your liver and now you're feeling it over here in your stomach, like it can't be your liver. Right. And that's, I think, so that's kind of, I think the way I can bridge that gap for folks is like, this is how we move that mindset around, okay, it's not this physical failure issue necessarily, right? There's some brain connection here that's creating a sensation. And so then I guess my way of thinking is like, what's the next step? So, okay, you're seeing your brain is creating that pain syndrome or that pain sensation. How do you then begin to dig deeper into
and obviously I have my ways of doing it, but I'm curious for you, like, what was your next step to getting deeper into like, well, what is this all about in the first place? Like, where does this come from and why is it happening for me?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I have to remember this too when I talk to people, there's a few steps. If you take somebody who's just getting open to the idea that it's not a physical condition that needs to be fixed, and you jump from there to like emotional processing,
Right.
life purpose, there could be like, you just hear dial tone,
Yeah.
they're done. So then from, once, if I connect with people and they start to embrace the pain science and they get that pain doesn't necessarily mean tissue damage that needs to be healed or fixed in some medical or surgical manner, then it's about understanding the nervous system and how a dysregulated nervous system can add to your brain's inability to process well and to exaggerate sensations or create them. That takes some work, but people can get it when they think about how your body behaves when you're in fight or flight. You said the stress that you've been under has created a low level continuous fight or flight, and it's become your norm and you don't even know it.
Yep.
I'm kind of start to connect with people and be like, can you sit still? Can you meditate? Can you single task and not multitask? And we've created a new norm in our culture. I'm guilty of it. I default back to this all the time and try to find methods. I watch my wife. She's so much better at it than I am. But we've created a norm of just staying so busy. And so get people to kind of recognize that they can't even sit still, that their nervous system is just buzzing at high RPMs all the time. And that is putting your brain in a defensive manner. And it's all these, its behavior is different. So getting them to warm up to that and then teaching them some tools, the same tools that I learned to start with, a bit around meditation, a bit around the deep breathing, that will calm your nervous system and be able to control that. You want a nervous system that has a big span, right? Otherwise, we're just emotional zombies. So we want that. But you also want to be able to regulate it and not have every email that comes in puts you into a panic attack.
Right.
And that's where we are in our culture quite often. Every confrontation puts you in panic mode or whatever it is. So if I can get that moved along a little bit, and talk about the pain science, you talk about the nervous system, there's nothing woo-woo here. This is science. Where people struggle with it is trying to connect that to chronic symptoms.
Yeah.
And they can even maybe relate to something acute, but it might be a leap for them to see that as something that can be attributed to a chronic issue.
I agree with that.
Yep. And then, the nervous system side. And then I learned a lot through the somatic tracking. My second coach especially worked with me on that. She was great. And that really changed my fear of pain.
That's amazing.
When you have low-level symptoms, being able to recognize it and be comfortable with it and really not try to wish it away or ignore it is just, all right, I know nothing's wrong with my body.
Yep.
And I have a sensation. For me, especially after that second big wave of it, it was sit bone pain. I couldn't sit. Is just being like, yeah, it's a small discomfort. It's a sensation. And you just lower your fear of it. And then that can really fade. And that's really where I think those things kind of all coming together get at the, any one of those can give you a lot of success. But for me, I definitely recognize that I really needed to do more on the emotional side. And, I don't have it all solved by any means. I mean, there's a lot I'm working on when I can, but I also try to explain to people at that point, if they've kind of followed those breadcrumbs, is like having unresolved emotional issues, whether it's things about the past, current, or future. I think there's a lot of talk about past traumas. I think that can be relevant to some people. Current can be an issue, or like the life purpose is more about worried about your future. Like, is this what I'm going to do for the rest of my life? All those things, you don't have to have it solved, but you can't just ignore it and keep your mind distracted.
Yes. And that's exactly what I found with my own stuff too, because as I think, I'm symptom free also. And yeah, I'm still learning. Like I'm constantly still learning more and healing more and like just having deeper understanding about myself, or, you know, working through other things that haven't been resolved, I feel like it really is that, just that change in approach though. Like when you decide to stop being so afraid and be in that survival mode and be in that, just that constant, like for me it was this constant like running away from myself, right? Like constantly staying busy, like you were saying, like totally focused outside of myself, distracting myself from what my body was doing, just like cutting myself off from it and like pushing ahead. And it wasn't until I stopped that, obviously, that my symptoms resolved. And, you know, so to me, as we were saying before we hit record, like symptoms are that thing that's trying to pull you into your body, like, hey, please, please, for the love of God, like stop and tune in and pay attention. There's ways that you're existing, there's things your body is carrying that like you can't, it's like you have a suitcase of like toxic sludge that you keep just like packing more and more full, and like your body's like, we can't keep carrying this around without some sort of consequence, something has to shift. And so again, it's that mindset shift where, again, it's normal and it's understandable to be afraid and to be kind of triggered or stressed about symptoms, but like ultimately they're trying to call you in. So we can have that sort of like, oh, what is this? I should probably pay attention to it though, is like kind of the other side, versus going into that, you know, immediate place of like suppress it, make it quiet so that I think our approach is so backwards because we're trying to silence the messenger so that we can continue to live in the way that is not conducive to health and healing, thinking that that's the solution, when really we can certainly, you know, calm the pain down. You know, I'm not opposed to taking medications or anything like that, because we do have to function and live. But if we're doing that and then nothing else, right, then we're just pushing ourselves forward in this life and in this mindset and in this way that is not actually taking care of the reasons why those symptoms showed up in the first place. So I love that, you know, just that. Yeah, I mean, and does that match with yours, what you said? Like you don't have it all solved, and yet your pain is gone, right? Is it right? Has it been gone for over a year, you said?
Yeah, well over a year now, right? Yeah, and what you touched on, I think, is important for folks that might be listening. Lowering your pain, however you can, is key. It's really hard to move on with the other things when you're uncomfortable and can't function and miserable. But recognizing that you are doing something that's temporary, it's not going to get you out of your condition.
Yes.
So I have people reach out to me because they're like, oh, you know, should I continue to go to PT? Should I continue to do stretching all around the pelvic pain? Should I continue to use meds? And I'm like, well, first off, ask yourself, is it helping? Because if you're doing something and you're doing it out of fear and you're doing it because you think it helps and it's not doing anything, then question that. If it is helping, awesome. But let me help you understand why it's helping. It's giving you a sense of, I mean, there may be, obviously, medication, there may be some chemical processes happening there. I'm not going to deny that. Right. But there also might be that it's simply making you feel safe. Mm-hmm. You know, the physical therapist that does the manual work, this person heard you, they helped you, they cared for you, they told you you're going to be okay. Mm-hmm. Great. But don't expect that they're going to find that reset button that's somewhere on your body. That's a Control-Alt-Delete that gets you to start over again. Same thing with stretching. All these things will give you that benefit of making you feel safe, knocking your nervous system down to less, getting it out of high alert, and get you a spot where you can think rationally.
Yeah.
But if you just think, I'm just going to keep doing this every week forever, you're going to be stuck.
Yep. And that's where people get frustrated, because it's like, oh, this is helping, thank God, you know, I found the answer. And then they, again, keep pushing ahead in that same mindset and lifestyle and all those things eventually. But on a physical level, I think eventually it's just that emotional luggage, so to speak, is going to override the medication eventually, because it's still there. You know, that medication is just a stopgap measure to help you function and calm down enough to start to think in a bigger way, broader way, like you were saying.
Pop up somewhere else in your body.
Right,
you know?
Exactly. Yes.
You'll go, okay, well, somehow my back pain moved to migraines or whatever it might be, or irritable bowel. So now I'm going to, but then, you know, if you just keep doing this same chasing, you know, then you're like, oh, I have irritable bowel now. I got to do an elimination diet, and and then you're just distracting, and you're just staying busy with it. It's another thing that your brain is comfortable doing, staying busy.
Yes, 100%. And this is ultimately why I stepped out of practicing as a naturopath and moved into this specialty because I was seeing that in the work I was doing, where it's like, okay, well, that's managed, but now we have this. Okay, so let's manage that. Now we have this. And, now, of course, I would get people who were kind of coming out of the conventional medical world into the alternative world, and they would have med lists. Like, I've seen people on like 30 things before. It's insane, the complexity of how the body is just never ending trying to get our attention, and we keep whacking it down and whacking it down. I think it's so crucial to say there are things that are necessary, right? Physical things that we need to do to take care of ourselves, right? And like, I think it's exactly as you said, we're using it as a tool to provide relief, to help us feel safe, to help our body calm down, to take the edge off of that activation. So it, again, is a mindset shift of knowing why you're doing it and what its purpose is, and knowing that it's not a forever thing, because we are so married to that model of I take the pill and that fixes me and then I move on with my life. And I think, again, this medicine is less appealing to folks because it's actually like more work than that. It's like, if you really want to like listen to what this illness is about or this symptom is about, it's asking you to step into a different life and into a different way of being and moving in the world and being in relationship with yourself too, right? Like that goes into that emotional healing and understanding all these things that have happened. So there's just more to it.
It's active and self-driven rather than passive and specialist driven.
Yes.
You feel like, well, I thought somebody was going to come along and fix this for me.
Right.
That's not the way it's going to work. You have to work on it, but it's much more gratifying.
Sacred Illness listeners, Dr. Erin here. If you're feeling inspired by the stories you're hearing in this podcast and you feel this inner nudge or pull of, I want to walk this kind of journey, or I want to learn the things that they're learning, or maybe you've been walking a similar path and you're thinking, I want to get past feeling stuck or lost or confused in my healing journey. When you're hearing these stories, you're seeing what's possible. You're hearing how people are moving through their illnesses to find deep purpose and meaning in their illness itself and also in their lives. And so if you are in that place of feeling inspired and ready to take your own healing to the next level, this is exactly what I created the Sacred Illness membership for. This membership is for people who are either completely new to this kind of healing work or have been doing it for a while and need more guidance and clarity for how to move through when they get stuck or when certain limiting beliefs come up or when they hit certain walls. This is a roadmap that's going to take you from point A to point Z with the clarity, the mindset, the energetics, and everything in between that you need to successfully walk the healing path. So what is this membership all about? It's not just another healing space that's all about random tools for relaxing your nervous system or repeating mantras that calm you down in the moment. Instead, the Sacred Illness membership is a step-by-step process that is going to teach you, why is your illness here? What is it asking of you, and what do you need to do about it? At the core of the membership is the Sacred Illness Blueprint. This takes you through what I call the hero's healing journey. Every stage of the healing journey is different, and the mindset, the energy, the tools needed are all different. And so the blueprint is walking you through each one of those steps, helping you understand where you are, why you're there, what to expect, and what to do to get through to the other side. So you never find yourself in that space again of, why am I sick? Why is nothing helping? Am I just going to be sick forever? It is really the core of the journey, and it is what is going to anchor you into your healing work time and time again. Every time you log in, it's going to tell you exactly where you're at and what you should be working on and how you're going to navigate the current phase of healing that you're in. In addition to the blueprint, we have the powerful Rewire Your Reality daily practice. This is something that we've offered as a standalone challenge, but it's also a core integrative piece of the membership itself. The healing journey at its core is about identifying how is my nervous system wired for survival versus wired for healing. The daily practice helps you really identify what are the ways in which my nervous system has patterns and beliefs and behaviors that are happening automatically without me knowing, that are creating conditions for illness that are showing up in my daily life. It's teaching you to identify those patterns and to rewire them in order to literally and physiologically shift your body into a place in which healing can actually occur. So those two things are really the core of the membership. But as you move through the blueprint, you continue to unlock what I like to call side quests. So if we think of the healing journey as sort of the main quest, we're trying to get to this root of why am I sick? What's the message? And what do I do about it? As you move through the blueprint, you get to unlock these other opportunities that will take you deeper into certain aspects of healing. So if, for example, you struggle with your relationship with food and eating and movement, there is an intuitive eating course that you can take that will guide you through the entire intuitive eating process. It will help you learn how and where and when you lost connection to your innate intuitive eater, how to reclaim that relationship and therefore heal your relationship with food. If you feel like you're someone who is constantly failing the healing journey or not getting the results that you want, or not feeling like you're able to take what you're learning and apply it in an embodied, living way, we have a course called Receiving Mode. And this is a really important side quest that you can go on off of the main blueprint journey that really teaches you the art of the healing journey, how to be in this place of action and also receiving. Because we can all get so stuck in this place of, I need to do more, I need to learn more, I need to see another doctor, I need to try another protocol. And we can get so in our head about it that we're missing the embodied reality that is healing, that we have to actually walk the talk. We have to practice what we preach. We have to be the person that we're trying to become. And so this course helps to teach what that feels like and how to shift into that space and that balance of doing and receiving so that we can actually reap the benefits of the work that we're doing. And if you are someone who's on a healing journey and you are also a healer, or you aspire to be in the healing profession at some point in your life, we have a course called the Wounded Healers course. This is a personal favorite of mine because as someone who is a wounded healer, I know how much we can have imposter syndrome at times or all the time in our work. We can feel like, who am I to help others when I myself still have symptoms and still struggle with health? This is the message of this work, that our illness is not a burden and not a barrier to being a healer, but is actually the invitation to step more deeply into this healing work. Through the work you do in the blueprint and inside your membership, you will learn with more and more clarity that your illness itself is actually the invitation to step more deeply into your purpose, to transform your suffering into your greatest gift, which is the gift that you give to others, to help them alchemize their pain, to understand their suffering, to see how the ways in which we are challenged in this life is an invitation to step more deeply into a space of meaning and into a space of health and well-being, and not the opposite. So this Wounded Healers course is really a way of passing on the sacred illness tradition to you that you can then pass on to your clients. And in this way, we send out these ripple effects throughout the world that really reinforces this new paradigm that illness is a sacred invitation to come back home to yourself. So this membership isn't about getting rid of your symptoms and suppressing them. It's about really learning how to connect to your body as a sacred guide, how to learn how to listen to what it's saying to you, how to be in a deep relationship with it, one of trust and one of reverence, understanding that your body is so wise and it contains everything that you need to heal yourself, to tap into your innate healing capacity, and more than anything else, to reconnect back to who you really are and who you were before life and trauma got in the way of that. So in addition to all of these incredible courses and the roadmap that will guide you step by step by step through the healing journey, ensuring your success, we have incredible support. There is a community forum where you can connect to the other members inside this space and find folks who are walking a similar journey to you. We also have monthly tea times where community members get together and can chat live through Zoom if you would like to meet face to face. We also have a whole healing resources library. So this is another entire resource for you to access for additional support like EFT tapping scripts or guided meditations, guided self-hypnosis tracks. We also have live monthly somatic yoga classes, and these are for folks who really want to get back into your body and have a more embodied approach to this work. They are taught every month by the incredible Diana May, who is a somatic informed yoga instructor, and all the recorded courses go into that healing resources library for reference if you can't make it to the live class. And one of our newest additions to the membership is a Q&A library. So as you're moving through the courses, you will have the opportunity to submit questions, and I will answer them live through video or through voice recording that is essentially giving you one-on-one coaching in this asynchronous way. The library of Q&A questions is going to be an ever-growing resource so that wherever you are in the healing journey, you can check in, see what questions people are asking about that particular part of the journey. You can learn from their experiences, feel validated in the fact that you're having similar questions or challenges, and you can help others by your questions, and they can learn from you and your process as well. From time to time, we have guest lecturers come in and teach workshops from anything ranging from astrology to somatic work and everything in between. And these just help us get a different perspective and be inspired about all the different ways in which healing can take place and all the different modalities that are out there. And twice a year, we have community-wide challenges. So this is a way in which we all come together and do the work together in a concerted way. These challenges serve to infuse a little more energy and excitement into the journey that you're currently on, or to just deepen and enrich your current process. So if you're ready to take the leap and join us inside the membership, click the link below in the show notes. As a thank you for being here, podcast listeners get 20% off your first month of the membership by using the coupon code PODCAST, all caps, PODCAST. I can't wait to see you inside the membership. I can't wait to support you on this next leg of your healing journey. And until then, let's get back to the podcast.
If I look at where I was when I was at my darkest spot and where I am now, like sometimes I'm like, I can't believe I did that. It's amazing. And yeah, there was all these attempts on the physical modalities for a bit, but once I realized that this is stress driven and I can embrace the idea that there's nothing wrong with my body, I can get back to riding my bike, I can get back to all the things I couldn't do, I can get back to work. I had to take time off from work when it hit me, and this was from coming from somebody who never took time off, which probably led to part of the issues. Right. So yeah, I mean, I think that if people can get there, then it's really quite empowering.
Yeah.
But I've certainly had people reach out to me that are very early on. They're not really open to it yet. They're frustrated to hear that I didn't find some medicine or something that just flipped the switch and it made it go away.
Yeah.
And they're not, they might not be ready yet to soak all this in. I bought one of the John Sarno books and The Way Out by Alan Gordon earlier in my journey, and they sat on the shelf because I was wrapped up in the physical treatments.
Yep. Totally.
So it took time to get there. And it was, like I said, I was lucky to have these breadcrumbs along the way. Really lucky on a bunch of the practitioners that I touched with. My first urologist, I had gone to urgent care to what I thought might be a UTI. I was up all night urinating and in pain. That was the first real big wave of it. And by the time I got to see the urologist, it had been a few weeks. And she was like, you've been tested twice. You don't have an infection. Get off the antibiotics. This is a manifestation of stress. Your pelvic and floor muscles are all tightened up and cramped. Now, she didn't put me on the mind-body path, but right. She was not like, let's send you off for 3 more scans.
Yep.
So that was like breadcrumb 1, right? It was in there. And I still, I mean, I went downhill much more from there. It got a lot worse. So, it took more than just that one, but I was very lucky, where other people get stuck in this for years.
Yeah.
Yep.
And it is totally that. I mean, I think all of us did the same path, right? I started out with prednisone and heavy hitting immune suppressing drugs and anti-inflammatories. And, I was 20, so I didn't really have much of a choice or worldview at that point to like have a bigger understanding, especially without social media being what it was. Like I couldn't hop on Instagram and whatever at that point, but still, right? Like I think there are ways in which we kind of have to see the other things fail to really get to that point, until the culture changes, right? Until the paradigm is shifted. And this is just the way that we all talk and think about it. It takes time for us to really ultimately feel safe with this other path, because as we've been talking about, a lot of all of this is a lack of safety, right? It's a lack of safety from that emotional perspective that then causes the illness, which causes a lack of safety. So then we go to what feels safe, which is what's familiar, which is Western medicine, right? That model is safe to us. And it's really scary when that starts to fail us. And that's when I think people really go into that crisis space that you were talking about, those really dark places where it's like, is this my life? And, 2 podcasts ago, I interviewed someone who did that same thing. And she got to that point where she was suicidal because she was like, I can't go on. Like, this can't be my life. I can't survive like living like this. And, again, it was just those like little shifts, like those little miracle things that happen that just put us suddenly onto a different path or just help shift our perspective. But it's really scary to get to the end, what feels like the end of the road, where it's like, I've done everything, my pain is worse, or my symptoms are coming back, or whatever that is. My hope is to keep putting this message out there. But it is those little breadcrumbs, those little seeds that get planted that I think really come through in those dark moments where you're like, well, what about that thing that person said? Like, maybe let's just give that a try. Who knows? Maybe that's the thing. But it is about, I think, slowly weaning off of one while the other one starts to feel more and more, maybe not safe, but just like, well, nothing else has worked, so I guess I'll just give this a try, or like, I'll look into that or whatever. So yeah, if you feel open to it, like in that dark place that you entered into, how did you, like, what was the thing that shifted you out of that? Or if you remember, like, how did you start to move back up again? Because I think a lot of people can relate to that space.
Yeah. So, like I said, I got hit by it. It knocked me out. I ended up taking about 6 weeks off from work and got to a point where I could return to work. And there was a few months where I felt okay. And then, a number of tough things happened quickly. The biggest one, my father being diagnosed with cancer and dying very quickly. And my pain went through the roof. My wife, Angel, she went out there and helped him with his last few days. And so, yeah, the pain went way up and I took that month off. It was December and, I took the month off. It was so frustrating because I had got to maybe a 70% return to normal before that. I went to that really awful, dark place. Can't believe everything came back. Now I have different pain, different symptoms, out of sick time. Certainly, I had really supportive coworkers, but still, felt like I was starting to test their patience. And I work directly with clients that I do engineering work for, project management work for, and they could start to lose trust that I'm going to be there when they call me.
Yeah.
So, I went back to some of the physical modalities at first because, there was that urgency. But again, I recognized that it was stress related. But what does that mean at first? Like when you don't quite get it all, you're like, all right, well, is the stress making it worse? Is there something there that's just amplifying it? And so I definitely had some of those breadcrumbs and I kept bumping into a different way of looking at it. I was starting to follow, these pelvic PTs online, because I wanted, hey, do this stretch, do that stretch. Hey, it's this muscle. Here's the anatomy of your pelvis, and trust me, like I could really give you TMI about treating pelvic pain. And so you're like learning all this stuff and you're in dark spot, you're looking for anything. And she ended up being the first coach I worked for. She was a pelvic PT that had moved to all remote clients. And your head just explodes. How could a physical therapist work with remote clients?
Right.
Isn't it all about putting your hands on somebody and fixing them? And she had on Instagram something along the lines of, if you are doing PT and stretching just to keep your symptoms at bay, then you haven't looked deep enough.
Wow.
And, like head exploding emoji. And just like, well, what is that? I messaged her, like, what does that mean? And she's like, your dysregulated nervous system and inability to process your emotions are causing your continuous pain. And then I ended up working with her for the first 3 months. And I'm sure it was frustrating as heck in the beginning because, like I'm thinking she's a pelvic PT, so I'm going to go over all of my symptoms and all these little things.
Yeah.
We need to talk about this. We need to talk about your nervous system. We need to talk about that you don't have physical damage. I was dealing with the fear of this pudendal neuralgia, basically a pinched nerve at your sit bones. And she's like, look at the bazillion number of cyclists in the world. Had you ever heard of this before? You've been into cycling for 25 years, training, racing, doing all. I'm like, no. She's like, because it's incredibly uncommon and your body is keeping you off your bike so that you can pay attention to it and pay attention to what's going on in your brain and slow you down. And so, I started to gain confidence that I could get better. And now still I was having little flares all the time, still having some issues, but there was some momentum there.
That's amazing. Yeah. I mean, and I think like, thank God for social media, right? Because like we can find those people or those messages or those things that were not so readily available back in the day. But yeah, it's that I think it does sometimes take us getting to that place of almost desperation where we're just like, what, like, I'll do anything. I'll try anything. I don't even care anymore, but that planting that seed, it, like you said earlier, like it's almost like we switch into this place of it being the worst thing ever, ruining our life in the way of like, like you said, it literally took you off your bike. It took you out of your work. You couldn't sit down. You couldn't do anything. And so the first mindset is like, this is the worst thing ever. I hate this. It's ruining my life. And then suddenly we start to see like, oh, okay, it's actually it's like a communication. Like my body's actually trying to get me to look at something deeper. And it's only until we first understand that and then start to understand what it's trying to get us to look at that it does start to become empowering in that way. Because at least for me, what I have found is it's a conversation, right? Like our bodies are, it's like a filter, right? Like they're holding and processing and communicating everything in our life, right? Like our body, our subconscious and our nervous system is processing so much more than we could ever consciously understand. And so, it's like letting us know, like, okay, we absorbed a bunch of stuff from here or here or here that consciously maybe you overrode or ignored or forgot, but we didn't. So please come talk to us and like look at this. And now it's time to look at this or process it. And so it becomes this dance, this like empowering conversation. So for me, like my symptoms, I think of myself as in remission. My gut is my sensitive spot, right? That's where my Crohn's was. I don't ever have full-blown Crohn's disease. I get little like, like my gut feels off a little bit, or I had a little bit of a flare up after I gave birth to my son. I think there's some immune stuff going on there just in general, but I do see it as this conversation of like reining me back in, right? Every time my stomach starts to feel a little off, it's like, okay, what do I need to check in on? And that is empowering to me because it's this way of like, I think of my illness now as like pulling me back into life, like pulling me back into the life that's actually life-giving and in alignment and like more me. And if I start to feel sick, it's because I'm veering off the path and going into old habits and mindsets and just ways of living that are not good for me. Because if it was, why would my body respond in that way, right? If that was truly how I was supposed to be. And so that's that empowering dance. And so it sounds like this woman you worked with helped to kind of, does that resonate with how she was kind of like changing your mind about your pain, like seeing it through this different lens?
Yeah. I mean, I started working with her when I was at my worst, and she got me to, through all the stuff I talked about earlier, the pain science piece. She got me through the nervous system. She got me started on the somatic tracking. And then I wrapped up with her. And then I had a few months where I had plateaued. I still wasn't back on my bike, even though, I was convinced there wasn't this physical issue. I had a lot of fear around it.
Yeah.
And so, I was going on about a year and a half of not riding when, cycling was a big part of my identity. You come to my house, there's cycling art all around. My wife and I ride. My social outlet is riding. It's a cultural thing. It's not just this hobby that I check in and out of.
Yeah.
So I wasn't back on my bike. That was goal one. Goal two was reducing my fear of the pain and not reacting to the tiny little flare-ups I would get in that panic mode that you would get. And the third one is I was trying to make a big decision on my job, and not really career direction, but I had been with my old employer for a long, long time. They had moved me around the world and all that, and I was ready to make a change. So I ended up working with a second coach. She's doing some different things now. The second coach, Jeannie Colwyn, she's very active, and so I worked with her, and she challenged all those things you're talking about, purpose and where you're spending your energy. I mean, every time I would get on the phone with her, I would think I would be talking about, one thing, and she would take it up a level. And when I help people now, I draw the line of where my capabilities are much earlier. I'm like, look, I'm an engineer. I helped you along. You really need to go and talk to somebody like you, Erin, or my old coach, Jeannie. Like, there's people that are much better at this. And I don't pretend to be able to help that, because I kind of see that, the pain and the body thing can be so many different things. And I think, you really need a lot of experience with kind of interacting with people to kind of read that. And I don't have that ability. But I also think that like pain can just simply be a distraction for you to think about something that's more difficult. Mm. And I think that for some people, it's pain. Other people, it may be another distraction. Being a workaholic, could be substance abuse, alcoholism. You can have an unhealthy relationship with exercise.
Yep.
The way you distract yourself. And some of those things, if you even think about that, has helped me change my perspective of exercise. Like, I'm still a work in progress. My wife right now, she heard me saying that, she'd be laughing, because this weekend I beat myself up about not getting to exercise. But, here we are, first world, life of abundance, and I create stress about how much I get to exercise. Unbelievably fortunate that I've got the time, the money, the location that I can go ride my bike on the trails.
Yeah.
And why should I ever think?
Right.
So I've tried, that's one area that this has opened me up to, is like every ride's a good ride now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think I'm much better at not being frustrated about exercise, especially with mountain biking. Like, I just look at it differently. Like, it's so much fun to ride your bike in the woods. And so why would I ever finish a ride and be like, oh, that wasn't enough, or I didn't ride great, or whatever? Just be thankful for it.
Right. It's all about perspective, and we can create those stories in the mind, and then the mind can take it and run with it and start to make it, it just builds and builds and builds from there. So we can take something that is a 2-hour thing on a bike and make it this negative experience. But again, it's like, well, why am I doing that? What is behind that? Like, what is that thing in me that feels dissatisfied, or it's never enough, or whatever that is? And
Yep.
I think again, it's an inlet, right? It's an opening, an invitation to say, okay, this is the surface kind of manifestation of something. It's like an iceberg, like what's beneath the surface that's really driving this, and how do I work with that? And I think that's part of the mindset shift for me too, where it's like, yes, symptoms suck, they hurt, no one wants them, I wouldn't wish them on anybody, and they are this incredible opportunity for you to get really curious about, why is your body doing that? What, it's a very wise machine. They don't just break and fail. That's kind of one of my sayings, is bodies don't fail, they respond. And so what's it responding to? It's this really beautiful opportunity to look more deeply, and to, like, kind of what you're talking about too, like, not just from a physical perspective, like this mindset can go across all aspects of life, where you just have a different relationship of, feeling more grateful and more present and more embodied and just more joyful, and shifting into a different place, because all of the things that are driving your body to manifest illness absolutely, manifest across the board. It's how you think about something is how you think about anything, kind of thing. So that's what I have found in my own work anyway, is the more I work on those stories and those ways of being that created my illness, like it starts to show up in all other places of my life, where I just have more capacity for, like you were saying, that expanded nervous system. I can hold more space for, yes, pain, but also the other end of that spectrum, which is joy and gratitude and all of that as well. Does that match with your experience? It sounds like that's part of that cycling story for you.
Yeah. Just, why do we get so worked up about things? Like, trying to get out of that mindset of like, I'm in a mode and that's the way I got to stay in. And I interact with a fair amount of cyclists. My story is on a website called pnandcycling.com, where the PN is pudendal neuralgia.
Oh,
so
wow.
if you search pudendal neuralgia and you put in bicycling, cycling, you'll get to this website. It's a great woman, Kate, developed it because she dealt with it, and it's got like 6 riders' stories on it. So my story's on there. So I interacted with the riders on there when I was first understanding it, and got a range of different things, from the physical modalities and the, getting a different seat to sit on, all these different things, to some of the mind, body, and stress component. So now I have cyclists find me through there, and many of them are in that A-type personality, riding a ton of hours, have all their data, in charts and graphs, and got the bike computer, and they want to go back to that. And I'm like, well, why are you, I can relate.
Sure.
But I've done intentional things to get me out of that mindset. I'm going to be 52 coming up. I didn't make the Olympic team. Like, let's just get real. What is cycling in your life? Is it supposed to be fun and social, and an opportunity to go buy some cool toys and put them on your bike? They'll reach out to me and they're like, I want to get back. I have spring races coming up. I want to come on, let's realize why you ride. Let's get back to that. And maybe you need to totally ride for fun for a while. It's like they can't even imagine that. They're like, well, you've turned it into basically a method of abuse for yourself, even though you call it your hobby.
Yeah. And that's that distraction piece you were talking about, right? Anything can be a distraction if we wanted to.
Right. And so what are you not focused on while you're doing that? What do you, again, it could be alcoholism. It could be a number of different distractions. And, maybe your brain has created new distractions called pain. Yep. And it's giving you something else to think about rather than the things that you should be thinking about.
Totally. Yeah. And we were talking, and I kind of said at the beginning of the podcast too, just how fascinating in a way, how our body can sometimes produce something that very specifically interferes with the thing that we want to do. Or, like maybe the thing that could be an escape or a distraction or something that's just taking our focus. Like our body can just be like, actually, here's something that's going to take you totally out of that. Even your work, right? Like for you, you had biking and work, and both of those were like, nope, how about neither of those are accessible for you? And then it kind of forced you to look at it, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And then you had also shared, what was her name? Amy Mann?
Yeah, Amy Mann, the singer. Yeah. And she just, my wife and I listened to her a lot when we saw her in concert a few times back, a while back. Yeah. And she's just going out on tour again, but you can find her story of she had to stop touring, stop recording because she was dealing with incredible migraines, and listening to music made them worse. So you got a professional artist. This is what she does for a living. And, people love her creative music, and she couldn't do it. And she ended up being drawn to basically cartoons. She draws comics, but uses them satirically, sarcastically.
I was going to say.
She used that as her way out. She was essentially processing emotions through this artwork, and she's returned to recording and touring. So it's really cool. But her stress or whatever was going on, her to not even be able to play. That was what got her to recognize that I need to do something about it.
Yeah. It's really hard to trust that something so painful and uncomfortable that's taking us out of life is for our benefit. It's, it's taking you out of life. If it is taking you out of life, that's intentional, right? Like kind of just trusting that and trying to follow that and say, like, what is it about and it's not even necessarily what you're doing, because like singing, performing, biking isn't inherently bad, right? But maybe it's like, how are you using that, or what are you not doing in addition to that needs to be done or looked at? So it's just kind of trying to pull you in and get you to reassess. So then maybe you can go back to cycling or performing, but it's with that different mindset. Like you said, like you're working on that mindset of, can I make this actually like joyful and pleasurable versus like a task or a thing in a to-do list that's just like putting me more in that survival stress mode, because that mindset is, that's not conducive to a healed body, right? That's just going to shift you back into that state. I am curious, like, do you feel like your approach to biking was kind of in the part of the mindset or approach to life that was part of what you think manifested your pain?
Yeah, it was all of it. It was the stress I put around work. It was looking at exercise as something I had to do. And it gets almost past stress relief. You just get it to be like, this self-abuse in some ways. It's like you don't feel unfulfilled every time you don't get to it, and you don't even know why. So yeah, it was my relationship with exercise. It was the stress, and that I put myself under work. And what's it called when you doubt yourself and people actually think you're good at something?
Imposter syndrome?
Imposter syndrome. I had a massive amount of imposter syndrome with work. And this is just a number of things that all added up. And I think there was some identity change too. You're in a different role as a parent when your boys are your boy's age, right? And my boy's my age. There's an identity change. And so there's a lot of things I think combining that I was staying busy and not recognizing and not being present. And so, I think the pain really got me to slow down. It got me to slow down so much that I spent weeks at home recovering.
Yeah. So we could say that's sort of the quote unquote gift, I guess, right? Is that it got you to slow down and reevaluate your approach to life and then of course the like other work that you've been doing. So, and I love your stepwise sort of approach to like for helping people like, start with pain science, then move into the nervous system, and then kind of move into more like accessible things like breathing and somatic tracking, like it's, I can see how you're just really gently like moving people into that space where then it's like, okay, now maybe let's look at some emotional stuff, but you're not just like ripping off the band-aid of like, what happened to you when you were a kid? Because people are like, no, bye. Like, not into that. I'm not an engineer, but I feel like I have that kind of brain way of thinking of things. I always think of it like the forest for the trees, like what's the big picture first, and then how do we move people closer into the details? Because for me, that's how I make sense of things. It's like, what's the big story that I need to understand to get the big gist of it, and then I can start to understand the littler pieces. So I feel like that's really going to help folks who have this kind of brain, but in general who are not ready to like maybe take the leap. I can't tell you how many people have like who end up working with me have said, like, I stalked your Instagram for years. I was reading about this stuff for years before I felt ready to like do the work. And it's understandable. It's unknown. It's scary. It's not really fun work sometimes to do the emotional stuff. Right. And we don't always want to, or are not ready to like change our life, especially if we don't know what that looks like, or if we do know, maybe like we know how it needs to change, but we're not ready for that. So I guess that's just sort of the message to folks, right? Is take your time with this and move at the pace that feels comfortable, but know that this is sort of the trajectory. This is an option and a path to really move into a different relationship with pain and symptoms in general. And it's, yeah, like it's following what feels comfortable for you, but also I think knowing it is a little uncomfortable to shift into a different way of dealing with symptoms. It's unknown, it's unfamiliar, it's inherently going to be sort of scary to do that. But like what lays on the other side of this path versus the other path is, you know, I can't say across the board it's going to be amazing, but I think there's so much more to this than there ever could be, you know, if we were just taking a pill and then like pushing ahead with our normal life. Like truly, this is an opportunity and an invitation to step into something just more, yeah, slow, beautiful, intentional, loving, joyful, great gratitude filled, right? Like what life is supposed to be, essentially. So I know you had some thoughts too, just like people had mentioned, like if you could talk about this or that. I just want to make sure we touched on all the things that you wanted to touch on today with your story and anything else you want to bring up.
Yeah, well, you kind of just triggered one there. One of the what people get a bit when they connect with me is, you know, I'm not a coach. I don't have a program. I'm not looking to, you know, this is my livelihood. So there's a comfort factor there that when people interact with me, they know that I'm not trying to kind of, you know, hey, join my program and all that.
Yep.
And so they can use me as a sounding board, and they can also say, you know, well, can I do all this on my own? And I was like, sure, you could walk into the gym and look at all the equipment and maybe get in shape. But, you know, if they worked with a trainer, they would get in shape faster.
Yep.
And I kind of use that as an explanation. So, you know, what they get out of working with a coach is that, you know, you've seen so many people, you know where they're at, you know how to aim them, have all that experience, somebody that's going to help hold you accountable and keep you on track, and that you're not going to just flake out. So they want to know what worked for me and what they get out of working with a trainer.
Yep.
I think we talked a bit about whether you're using a physical remedy while at the same time, whatever you can do to get the pain under management. I think the other thing is with people happen onto this discussion about pelvic pain. Maybe it's just like anything, but that's what I end up interacting with people on. They want to hear that you had all these symptoms because they have this specific thing. And if they don't hear it, they lock up and be like, oh, well, Andrew didn't have what I had.
Yes.
I had them all. I had the frequent and urgent and painful urination. I had deep pelvic pain. I had sexual pain and dysfunction. I had constipation. I had pain in my upper legs, lower back, abdomen, and then the sit bone pain that, you know, where people associate that with that pudendal neuralgia. And they, just like we talked about earlier, they changed. You know, something would feel good and this, you know, something would feel bad and then it would feel okay. And then this. And when people connect with me, I tell them, like, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter which one you have or if your boxes don't check exactly what the boxes I had. You know, one, these pelvic floor muscles all overlap and intertwine. So they can wreak havoc and change. Yeah. So don't get worried about that. And then the other one, it's like, it's all just a way that your brain is creating pain, turning signals into sensations, and keeping that going. And it's just this neuroplastic pattern, pain, fear, just keep on each other. So I definitely wanted to cover that because it's very common when people connect with me about, you know, oh, I want to hear what symptoms you had.
I love that. And that's my hope too with this podcast, is to just keep interviewing like so many variety of things, because that's part of the nervous system too, that I was talking about earlier, like safety in the nervous system. We feel safe when it's familiar, and it's almost like we have to see to believe, right? We have to like see ourselves in someone's story, or we have to relate to it. So it's like, okay, it worked for them, it can work for me. Otherwise there is so much fear and like, I don't know, that like that hopelessness that can seek in or sink into, where it's, yeah, if it's not exactly the thing, it's like, well, okay, that's why, because he didn't have what I have. So like, that's why it worked for him. So I think that is really important what you said. Like, it doesn't matter, although I know how much it feels like it matters. Like it truly is this sort of universal thing that can show up literally anywhere in the body. And even though it's not exactly the same, it's the same core principles, but you had it all. So that checks all the boxes for the pelvic pain folks out there anyway.
Yeah. And there was, I get a lot of like, they want to know specifically what I did. And then, oh, did you journal? Did you do this? And I don't have good answers for that. That's another reason why I aim people at coaches. I go, hey, you've quickly hit the limit of my knowledge. And there's people who are much more capable, and they're going to be able to read where you're at and suggest the things. And I said, and again, this is not pills and prescriptions and surgery. It's not going to be the same for everybody.
Right.
And so, I would love it if I loved journaling. It doesn't draw me to it. I know I would get more out of it if I did it. So it wasn't really part of my recovery. But again, everybody's going to kind of aim towards something different of what works for them. And so I think a lot of people overwork what they're going to do. Oh, I've been trying to decide how I'm going to do this for months. Be like, whoa, just give it a shot. Try something for a bit. See if it resonates with you.
Yep. That's important too. That kind of like analysis paralysis we get into. And I think that's part of the fear, it's like, it's unknown. So we just want to make sure we know everything or have all the details or like have all the evidence it's going to work. And we just have to start. Even if you work with a coach and it doesn't quite work or it's not the right fit, like try another one, just try something else, because there's so many different ways to like approach this kind of work. There's so many different things that mean mind, body, or somatic work or whatever. The core of it is you're trying to get into that nervous system programming and that emotional programming and figure out what's there. But there's 1,000 ways to do it. So if it doesn't work the first time, if it's not the right coach, if it's not the right modality, just keep trying stuff, because it doesn't everyone, not something that works for you isn't going to work for me or isn't going to work for the listener, right? Like we just have to try stuff and find the combo of things that work. And I think that's where it comes into like, you can take a medication and you can be on that diet and you can also do this work, or you can have any combination of stuff, just as long as some part of what you're doing is focusing on the nervous system piece and the trauma, emotional, whatever piece too. Doesn't matter what it looks like, just like make sure that's part of your toolkit.
But isn't that a statement about the personality types that have chronic pain? It's that perfectionism, that, like you said, analysis paralysis. I mean, these are all personality traits that are common with people that develop chronic conditions. So like even just recognizing that, I was messaging with somebody just recently. I was like, hey, isn't this exactly why you and I both dealt with? And it's just like, yeah, I'm overthinking about what I'm going to do. I'm like, just jump in and fail and then try something else.
Yep.
And you'll learn something in the process.
That's fascinating. I think that is an interesting point to make, because I'm realizing that most people I talk to, it's like we're all in our heads, we're thinking, we're all learning, but not a lot of doing, not a lot of applying or embodying. So it's taking that leap.
Dr. Sarno, he studied the personality traits that he saw that had chronic pain that recovered through mind-body approaches. And he had a list of typical personality traits. And so that's really all very interesting stuff.
Yeah, that's fascinating too. Dr. Gabor Mate has when the body says no, and he talks about like personality traits with different conditions and diagnoses too. So there's something to that for sure. And like how and why or where it manifests physically for us, it's really fascinating. This has been an amazing conversation. I'm so grateful for you, just because you don't do this for like anything other than just to share your story. I think that's just incredible. And so grateful for folks like you who have, first of all, walked this path. So grateful for your healing and your pain-free life, that you can just get back to what really brings you joy and allow it to bring you joy, and to continue to just feel like you're living the life that you really deserve. I'm just very grateful for you to have been willing to come on here to share this with us. It's an insightful episode for folks. I love your approach, that those steps for people, like I really think that's going to land for people of like, okay, I'm feeling lost or whatever, but now I have step one. Like, where do I start? Okay, I'm going to start learning about pain science. I'll get some books. I'll start following Alan Gordon and, these names that we've mentioned. Like, there's so much out there to just start to familiarize yourself with more of that bigger picture of like what's actually going on. And then as you feel safer with those bigger pieces, like moving in further and further to more like, okay, so what is this about me? What do I need to specifically do and look at now that I understand these bigger pieces? So grateful for that approach, and so grateful for you. And thanks for being on the podcast. I'll link your name down below if people do want to reach out and just chat with you or learn from you or see pictures of your dogs and your bikes.
That's worth it, right?
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, Andrew.
Thanks so much, Erin. This has been fun.
Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Sacred Illness Podcast. If you find this information shared here inspirational and educational, please share it with those you think would benefit from this work. To take this work deeper yourself, check out our website, www.aurorasomatic.com, where you can explore our coaching, community, and course options. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel where new content is coming out all the time, intended to inspire, awaken, and help you deepen your relationship with yourself, your life, and your world. We'll see you next time.